Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I am your host, Daniel Coolbaugh. Today, I have me a very special guest, Stephen A. Guglich. Stephen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me on.
Oh, yeah. I absolutely love what the podcast group's doing at this point. I never thought we'd get over like 300 people, authors and creators in one spot.
So cool.
Yeah, it's been really awesome. So it was nice to, talk to you and, and be able to get you on. And, anytime I can also find somebody on like TikTok or, Twitter or something, it feels like fishing, I like
That's
throw
right.
the bait out there and then, I reel them in and makes me feel
Yeah.
like I got something, I'm like, haha, look at me.
Uh,
So yeah, it's nice to know that social media is working, at least somewhat for us. So yeah, it feels good to, send out the invite and have people like yourself, take us up on the offer and, allow us to help you, get your, your works out there. So thank you so much for coming today.
Thanks for
We'll
having
start
me.
with that first question, which was actually given to me by a fan, I think way back in season one, and it's been a fan favorite. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
Oh man, my writing journey. Well, uh, I'm 54 years old now, so and I have my first book that just came out back in March, and so my writing journey has been such I wouldn't say an uphill battle, but it's been a series of should I or shouldn't I or can I or can't I type stuff, and it really took my wife. We've been married for 15 years now,
Oh, wow.
and she's the one who really encouraged me to start writing, to get in there, and so I say we because she's been so encouraging. I worked on this for 13 years to get
Oh, wow.
Piercing the Veil out on March 31st of
That's
2023.
awesome.
So it's been a crazy journey. It's been just trying to find time to write and raise a family and work a full-time job.
Yeah. Definitely know that struggle. Someone asked me, like, how's the writing going? I'm like, I have a newborn. So I'm like,
Yes.
I'm sporadic. I'm so glad people ask me, like, well, why'd you do all these things ahead of time? I'm like, well, I knew we were having a kid. I'm like, we planned it, and I'm like, I planned my writing, as much as I could accordingly. So yeah, I give credit to anybody, who has kids, a full-time job, is trying to do anything, other than
Yes.
just those two things. I mean, writing, I think though, in particular, it's like, I think it's just so difficult, right? Because it's almost like it's draining on a different level, right? And
It is. It is.
like,
It's
yeah,
definitely. But if I find if I don't write, like if I get super busy with everything else, with
yep,
work and everything, I really get antsy because I got
yeah,
all these stories going on in my head, and I'm like, I,
yep,
I got to find time. I got to do it. So
yep.
I found the secret is getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning before everybody else, and I
Ex-
and I
I'm
write it.
sorry. It's so funny that you said that because I was just talking about that to my buddy. He goes, "What's your plan?" I was like, "Getting up at 5:30, I guess, because
Yeah.
nobody's awake."
Yep. It works wonders, I tell you, man. It is amazing. I mean, the house is quiet. There's no
Yeah.
one bothering you. And it's just, it's fantastic. I've done my best writing, I think, from 4 to 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning.
Well, I just find it funny because like so many like I feel like there's so many authors I know that do that. I mean, I'm a teacher, so like I know, like oh my god, it feels so bad. I'm looking at some people's names today. Oh I don't want to I'm not going to say the person's name because I know I'm going to say their first name and they have the author name. But I know there's one of the teachers I was talking to, she's an English teacher, and that's what she does though. Like she gets up at 4:30 and she'll write, and then if she keeps going, like she'll dictate in the car. And then
Oh,
later on when she gets home, she'll fix it, or the next morning she'll fix it. So I have a pretty long commute. I've actually been switching around with Word. The audio on Word's like okay, at least it won't do the capitals all the time, but it'll, or some of the names will mess up. But at least it'll do periods. There are other ones like no
nice.
and stuff. Yeah, like I've actually finally got it to like work somewhat. So my son will be sleeping and I'll talk, and then if he's sleeping, I'll fix a little, or so I'm still. I think it's always about trying to find that way in that time.
Yes.
I think a
I
lot
gotta
of people though they give up too easily. I think personally,
yes.
and
Yeah.
because it is easy, right? It's a lot easier to for you and me to be like, oh, we have kids, and
Yeah.
this and that, But it's like if you really want to do the thing, it's like working out for me. Like I'm like I don't I have had a problem with my back and mobility issues, and I've spent the last 2.5 years fixing them, and now I'm like at a point where I'm almost back to where I used to be in terms of martial arts shape and stuff. And I'm
Cool.
like, I don't want to lose that. So I'm like, I have to do
Right.
at least 30 minutes a day. And I've actually thought about that with writing too. Even if I get 15, 30 minutes a day, let's say it's 150, 200 words, well, there's a lot of authors, who they might only get 2,500 words in a day. But if I can do, just like, two writing sprints, I think writing sprints have saved me the last year, year and a half. So I think, yeah, it's all about finding that sweet spot, right? Or what works for you. But
That's right. Yeah, and you got to persevere.
that's a
You
good
can't
point.
let anything get in your way. I mean,
Yeah.
you really we have all that negative self-talk that goes on in our head, and then you have time, and then you have everybody vying for your attention, and you just got to say, you got to I got that story in my heart. I got to get it out. And hey, maybe it's just for you. Maybe you're writing the story for you.
Yeah.
Maybe you will find an audience out there. Maybe it's just for your family. I mean, you've left a legacy. I mean,
Yeah.
for your kids. I know there's several authors who did that, where they just started out writing a book for, their kids or their wife, and then it turned into something else. But just get that story out. I mean, don't worry about anything else.
I'm glad you mentioned legacy. Like for me, like people are like, why are you spending so much time and energy? They're like, you work really hard at your job. They're like, you're there earlier, you're there later than everybody. They're like, why do you do this? Why do that? And then you're also trying to write, you're doing a podcast. I'm like, well, I'm like, I think legacy is a good one. I'm like, even if the only thing I show my son and my students is that, oh, I thought of this thing 14 years ago, here's the product, like that's a huge goal. Even if I never sell a copy, right? Just completing the goal
Right.
to me and that legacy piece, I think is, sure, do I want to make money off of it and be able to, do this full time or even, really well part time? Sure. But I think, yeah, I think you make a good point for me, that goal really, I think, is legacy, and just showing that if you want to do something badly enough, you will be able to find a way if you want to. So I think that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
so that second one for our audience, what genre or genres do you currently write in and why?
I mainly write fantasy, but I have lots of ideas for sci-fi. So, I'm
Okay.
your typical fantasy sci-fi geek, sci-fi nerd. I mean, fantasy nerd. I grew up with it. So that's that's my jam. I enjoy that. Yeah, and I'll read fantasy or sci-fi. That's pretty much it. A little bit of historical fiction, a little
Wonderful.
bit of Christian fiction or Christian books, but mainly I love escaping into a good fantasy or sci-fi book. But when
Yeah.
I'm writing fantasy, I have this weird pet peeve. If I'm writing fantasy, I only read fantasy because I don't want to be tainted. I want the fantasy juices flowing. So I'll stick
Yeah.
to a good fantasy book.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, that makes. I've been on a big. I get that. I've been on a big fantasy kick lately with writing. Like I switched, took a second for my Mech Warriors Sci-Fi, which is actually my first Sci-Fi, and I got kind of stuck, and I was so into the Kindle Vella like series that I was listening again to Hammer and the Blade series by Paul S. Kemp, and I loved his two main characters, and I highly recommend it for anybody if you are a Fitz Lieber fan with Farhad and the Grey Mouser. I just love the buddy cop fantasy
Cool.
aspect, and Sword and
Uh-huh.
Sorcery. So I was like, I want to do that, So I've been on a huge kick lately. My friend and I were supposed to read sci-fi. He goes, I guess we're reading more fantasy. I'm like, yeah, I just need to right now, and
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah, I totally get that. Yeah, it definitely gets the juices flowing.
that's for sure. Yeah.
So this is actually my favorite question to ask, just because I am an author and I love writing, so I love asking other authors, about their books, their babies. So what is your Veil Saga about, and how did you come up with this idea?
Oh, that's a great question. And the Veil Saga comes from the idea, how when you look back into the world, you look through history and through all the different cultures that we have, there's always these stories of myths, legends, magic, enchanted creatures. We get dragons, we get, chimera, you got unicorns. You know, where did all that come from? And why don't we have it now? I mean, now
Yeah,
we know, it's like, okay, we know what reality is and we know what fantasy is. But back then, they must have believed in some way or that those were real. So I kind of got that idea of, or I kind of the juices started flowing there where, okay, so what happened to all that? Where
mm,
did the magic go? And so I started with just playing around with origin stories of
Oh, that's
different
cool.
myths and legends and how they would have evolved into our day and time and why they're not here anymore. So that's where I came up with the Vale saga. I came up with the idea that these enchanted creatures, elves and dwarves and gnomes and all that, all those your typical ones, they existed at one time, and I just pretty much stuck with all Earth, and any fantasy or mythological creatures from legend, and I just stuck with them, and I said at some point in history they must have mingled with humans in some way. You know,
Yeah,
you look at the Old Norse, they have all the tales of the dwarves and
yeah,
and
yeah.
and, and the gnomes, and you look at these other cultures and they have tales of these. So the idea struck, well, where did they go? What happened? So I came up with the idea that these elves and other enchanted creatures, they decided humanity is getting too big for its bridges. They're taking over. They're starting, they won't listen. We're trying to get them to act peacefully towards each other, and all they want to do is war. So what they've done is they decided they're going to hide themselves behind a
Mm,
veil. And that's
that's
where the
cool.
idea comes from. So they're just waiting. They're there in the background, just waiting for humanity to kill themselves out. And every now and then they pass through the veil to kind of check things out. I have this tradition that the elves have where it's kind of like the Amish tradition of the Rumsprucha,
Oh, cool.
where they leave and they, when they get to a certain age, they go and they explore.
Yeah.
So I have it where the elves do that, and and that's where all those little ideas come from when you look at history. That the elves and the shoemaker, the ideas of leaving, if something was missing and then all of a sudden there was something left behind, and how did that happen type thing. And as I was doing research for this to find all these little stories where humanity was tainted in some way by these fantasy creatures, I came across one of the most fascinating stories that just blew me away. So there was this guy back in the 1600s. He was right now, to this very day, he's considered the father of modern toxicology.
Hmm.
He was a doctor, studied all that stuff, and he was very well acclaimed. His name was Theo. I can't remember his name, but he changed his name along the way to Dr. Paracelsus.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, one day, he just decided he was going to start investigating these ideas of paranormal experiences or things like that. And the idea of gnomes came from this guy. He claims that while he was in his workshop one day, uh, these creatures passed through the walls of his shop, and he called them nyms originally, and the word nyms became gnomes. And this is a real guy. This is a noted person who, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
he was the father of modern toxicology. And so he wrote all these different stories or investigations, scientific papers about all these different ideas. So it just blew me away when you do all this research and how these people really believed at some point. But I gotta wonder about Paracelsus. He was a toxicologist, so
Yeah,
I'm
yeah, yeah.
wondering
Maybe
I'm
switch
wondering
to.
if he might have been, sniffing a little bit too much of the stuff that he was investigating
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
started to hallucinate, but
Well, there was one.
still.
I'm totally blanking because it's funny that you mentioned that because I immediately thought, oh, now I'm gonna blank on who the. I remember learning about another science, like a scientist who had a very similar experience, and they were working with lead, and and they didn't know at the time, right? Lead poisoning. So he had maybe that experience, but he was having some experiences, and it turned out he was just probably had lead poisoning. So, but it's interesting, right? Like you just
Yeah.
there's a couple of countries though, where you know, they have like the protected now. Oh my gosh, like Norway, I think I just saw Norway has like protected fairy rings now, like in
Yes.
parks. Yeah, like they're like you literally can't touch the trees, and there's certain places in Japan that my friend was telling me that they have certain there are certain forests and things that are protected because of the mythological aspect, and there's
Yes.
all over the world that like Alaska, they believe in their version of maybe like a Dugar or a stone dwarf or
Yep.
something like that, and people have claim to see him. Like there was a sheriff
Exactly.
just recently, yeah, who
Yeah.
very credible, like the captain or whatever, like the head sheriff of this big county, and he was
Mhm.
like, this creature just ran across the road. Yeah, so to me, I love that stuff. I originally wanted to be a cryptozoologist, so
Oh, that's
stuff
cool.
like that. I love historical mysteries. Like
Yeah.
I think anything like that, like the Lost Legion, whatever, anything. I think it's
Yeah.
just absolutely
Exactly.
have to be.
And that's what that's where that's basically that's the framework of the Veil
Oh,
saga.
that's
So,
cool.
when the first book tackles some popular myths and legends and ideas and thrusts a guy named Jeremy into it out of who just gets caught up in it, and he's just your ordinary average guy or seemingly ordinary average guy,
Mm.
and how he deals with it. And then there's another main character as well that is gets wrapped up into it, and it just follows their journey as they discover more and more about the veil and what's happening behind it.
That's cool. Well, I like how you answered that because it actually leads me right into the next question. When it comes to world building, what do you find most important?
I love I consider myself I brag about my world building skills because I love it. I just
It's fun.
I think it's so important. And when I read other people's stories, that's really the thing that I look for the most. I look
Mm.
for the
Yeah,
credibility in the world building
yeah, yeah, yeah.
because everything happens for a reason.
Yep.
Cultures exist because something happened in that culture that led them to believe and act the way that they do. And that's how I tackle my world building. That's one of the reasons why it took me 13 years to write the Veil Saga, because
No, understood.
I rewrote, I took from mythology and legend and I rewrote the culture of all the different enchanted races. What would happen to these? I looked at the Norse and their stories of the dwarves
Mm.
and what would happen. Okay, so if they're hidden behind this veil for 1,000 years, what would their culture evolve into?
Yeah.
And so I did all that, and I just kept on asking questions. Why do they do this? Why do they believe what they believe? If they came across this, how would they act? And so I consider myself a deep world builder. I think it's so important. And when I'm reading another book, if I read a book and it's like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would they act? Why would this so and so do this, or why? And the world building just isn't there. It's a pet peeve for me. It's hard for me
Mm.
to disbelieve that. So that's why I guess it's so important for me, because I just love to world build. It's fun. But I grew up playing D&D too, so I get to, my dad was my first dungeon master, so
Oh, that's cool.
he did all the building, the world building and ideas and all that and stuff. So world building is a big part of my writing.
I love world building. I would same thing. Like there's so many different things. That's why people they're like so on Kindle Vella, just so our audience knows, like they get it's copyrighted for up to like a year and a half.
Mm.
So I can't just. That's why I have my own fantasy series, and I've spent 14. I guess now. Well, I'm older now, so I guess now it's not 14 years. So holy moly, I guess now. So oh man, it's kind of sad. So 21 years. That's really quick, Steve.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
I guess, wow, I'm 7 years behind on this. But anyways, for 21 years, I did not want them, to control my characters and my world. So I had this other planet set, similar setting, and I was like, oh, it's kind of nice. I have this other planet and these cool ideas and a little bit different magic systems and stuff. So I thought, well, I'll use this instead. But I got to say, it's been really hard in terms of Kindle Vella because you have to give things so quickly. You can't have a lot of exposition. So that personally is for me is always a hard one with short stories because my the books I can take a little bit longer, give at least a little bit more dialogue or something. But that's just for me has been one of the things that has to be so quick. But still, like a reader like you, I want to make sure that you're still feeling the depth of the world. And I found that it's been a very welcome and interesting challenge to do, with short, smaller amount of words. But that is one of the things that I worry about in any context of writing because I absolutely love world building. So I'm so
Yeah.
glad that you that you
Oh
put it
yeah.
that way. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely
Yeah.
essential,
I
right?
I don't just consider, like I said, I don't consider myself a world builder. I consider myself a deep world builder because
Yeah.
I go all the way back to the beginning. And the next series after the Val saga, I'm really looking forward to because that one doesn't take place on Earth.
Oh,
So
cool.
I get to I have all these ideas that that I just really get to start from scratch. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
a lot
Oh,
of
that's
it's
exciting.
based on stuff that my father wrote and did
Oh, that's
for
cool.
some of our role playing,
That's awesome.
sci-fi role playing, and sadly my dad passed away
Oh,
about
sorry to
five
hear
years ago, so he never got to um experience or enjoy any of this. But so um but that I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to getting to that deep world building where I get to
that. Yeah.
start from scratch, where it's I don't have to do all the research that I taught, that I've done to try to evolve. What does an elf in the 21st century act like compared to an elf back in the, from the origin stories, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's really, I have to say that's really cool that you're taking, your dad's ideas. And speaking of legacy, like
Yes.
putting them in, that's really cool. So
Yeah.
that's kind of like my friend, he was teasing me. He's like, because like my son's only 3 months, so we're getting him like, we're getting him certain books and we're getting comics and stuff. And my mom's teasing me. She's like, you're gonna let him pick his religion, but not his genre. I said, for me, like I said, I love these things because I love the fantasticalism, and
Yeah.
and it goes back to what we were just talking about, with I just want my son to have a belief in something else, and just to there's so many kids I have. I'm like, oh, I joke with them in my classroom about Bigfoot and stuff, and they're like, he's not real. Bigfoot's not real, and I'm like, how do you know? And they're
Right.
just so they're so many of them are closed minded to those possibilities and the fantasticalism of our world. And I'm like, we live in a strange world and universe. I'm like, the fact that you think everything has been discovered. I just showed them the coelacanth, 65 million-year-old fish we thought was gone, and now it's here, And I told them, I'm like, you just gotta have that sense of wonder, And
Yes.
I
Oh my
personally think
gosh, that's
growing
so
up,
cool.
you know what I mean? I just think
Yes.
growing up with fantasy and sci-fi, my parents like both weren't really into it, but my grandfather loved both. And
Mm.
it was more movies, but, like, I remember sitting on his knee and, we would watch, edited versions, right, of Conan the
Yeah.
Barbarian.
Oh
The
yeah.
second one, Conan the Destroyer, was the one that him and I watched all the time. Buck Rogers, the original
Yes.
Battlestar Galactica, just like Star Wars was a big one for us. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
he loved that. He used to take me to movies all the time. So to have that
That's
sense of
cool.
wonder and storytelling, I think I'm like, I think fantasy and sci-fi, and historical fiction gives you more of that, and gives you
Yes.
I think it gives you a different perspective on the world, and it makes you see the everyday, I think, is more special than, if you looked at it from a different lens. So I like that, you're taking those things from your dad and putting them in. That's really cool.
I love that you brought up the idea of the sense of wonder because that's really one of my goals as a writer, and also an educator. That's something you and I have in common. I used to be a science teacher, and now I'm a
Oh,
principal,
cool.
and and I just want to, I want my students to be able to have that sense of wonder because everything is handed to them right now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, you
Exactly.
think about. I mean, I saw Star Wars for the first time on the big screen in 1977 with my dad. And back then there was nothing like it.
Yeah.
But now that's mainstream. I mean, everything, the our kids are it's there. That's what every science fiction and fantasy movie looks like
Yep.
nowadays with all
Yeah,
those
yeah.
really amazing special effects. But back then that was just jaw-dropping, unbelievable, and talk about your sense of wonder. And that's kind of what I wanted to bring back for students in my writing. And that was kind of one of the secondary ideas behind the Vale saga, is that there is the hidden, there is the unexplained in this world, and I tie a lot of that in so that when the students are reading it, they're reading real world stuff, and then they're also getting a little taste of the fantasy. But there's also a lot of historical fiction in there too, because I take his excuse me, I take historical accounts and I add a little bit of fantasy to them. So
It's definitely my favorite thing to do as a history teacher. Like I have the lost Roman legion, and I'm like, so why are they lost? And now, like, it turns out
yes.
somebody found a slip of paper where they're like, "Oh, we think it was a clerical error." I'm like, "So you lost one of the." I go. So wait a minute. I go. The most organized, besides the Germans, like the Nazis, the most organized society and military of all time just happened to lose their top two or three, at the least, most powerful and influential units. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense.
No.
And so I didn't like that. I didn't like
Uh,
that paper that just came out. It came out like 2 years ago. And they had this piece of paper. And I'm like, they're like, oh, they went back to Spain and they just got lost. I said, I think that's
no,
ridiculous as a
no.
historian. So my friend goes, well, you should write your own, version of that. And I was really reading a lot of historical fiction. So I'm putting zombies with it. So that's where.
Did you have you read the Codex Alera series by Jim Butcher?
Actually no, that one's actually on my list. And then there are a couple.
That's what the premise is. What happened
Yeah,
to
yeah. Oh, okay.
the Roman legion? That's
Oh,
what
that's cool.
the whole series is based on that. And
See,
then
nobody told me that. I just thought it was Roman Legion mixed with Pokemon. So I was just
no,
gonna
no,
read it
that's
this
the
summer.
whole idea. I mean,
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah. I mean, I guess I kind of spoiled it a little bit there for you,
Oh
but I
no,
mean,
no.
but
That actually makes me that may
that's
actually bumps
really
it
the
up on
whole
my list.
idea because I think it's towards the end of book one where you realize, because from a world building perspective, when you're reading that book and you're like, this is too much Roman on another world that doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense. Why would a Roman, and then you learn that this culture developed from that lost Roman legion. It's so cool.
Oh,
It's
that's
really,
cool.
yeah. I enjoy it. I enjoyed that series. It wasn't as well rated as his Dresden
Oh,
Files, but
yeah, yeah.
I enjoyed it. I liked it. And that was one of the main reasons I liked it was that he took that question, what happened to the Roman Legion? And you know, and then so I mean, I thought about kind of doing that too, but in some way and explaining that in the Vale Saga. But then there's also the Lost Colony of Roanoke too. So
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
might explore that a little bit too.
Oh, that'd be cool. Yeah, that's why I always tell kids. I'm like, there's so many cool things in history. I'm like, they're like, history is boring. I'm like, so I'll pull out something like that, and I pulled out my high school students. I pulled out for summer school. I pulled out Gobekli Tepe, and they're like, wait a minute, wait a minute. They're like, this thing's like 12,500 years old. They're like, we thought you said that we were hunter gatherers. I said, that's not what I said. I said, that's what mainstream said. I said, and I want to just point out, I'm like, we don't know everything, and just again that sense of wonder.
So
And
cool.
I had them like the rest of the summer, they were like really into the mainstream or whatever the standards and stuff. But just getting them to see that not everything has been discovered. I think
Right. Yeah. We
that.
don't know it all. We don't
Yeah,
we
exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think that, yeah, with technology, I think that they think that and we think that.
Yeah, well, of course, because everybody you go online and everybody has an answer. They think they know what really happened or
Yep. No, totally.
so
Well, I'm really excited for that fifth question. What type of magic system have you created and how did you come up with this idea?
well so because it takes place on Earth and because I wanted to incorporate as much of Earth as possible. And I was really agonizing over trying to figure out, okay, I wanted the magic system to be believable. I wanted it to be almost science based in a way.
Oh,
So a friend of mine pointed me in the direction of 0 point energy. Have you ever heard of that concept? So yeah, it's the energy,
yeah, yeah.
it's that all that untapped energy that's there, that's between the molecules and everything. And um, scientists for years have been trying to tap into it. It's that whole idea of the perpetual motion machine, the energy that
Yeah,
never
yeah.
runs out or everything like that. So I started to do a lot of research on this 0 point energy, and then I took
Cool.
the concepts that I've learned in that 0 point energy and I adapted that into a magic system. And then I had to explain, well, if that's if the elves and the dwarves and the gnomes and all these other enchanted creatures use that as their magic system, why can't we as humans do that? So then I made it. I made them. I separated humanity and the enchanted people into two different categories. So there's bioelectrical beings, which is
Oh,
humanity and animals and what we commonly know, and there's biomagical beings, and their bodies run on this source of magic, this 0 point energy. So they're able to tap into it, use it, and manipulate that magic or that energy and use it for what we would consider magic.
Oh, that's
So
cool.
that was the whole idea behind the magic system. And so that took me a while to develop, and I had to develop it on how each of the different races, enchanted races, used the magic in a way, like the gnomes back in history, they were known for being able to walk through walls or pass through, solid objects, as was described by Pericles. And so I incorporate that into their
Oh, that's
physiology
cool.
and their magical abilities.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's awesome. I really
Yeah.
love that. That's
It was
cool.
it was fun. I enjoyed creating that because, again, when people read the Vale Saga, I want them to have that sense of wonder, but I also want them to be thinking, man, this could really
Yeah,
have
yeah,
happened, or this
yeah,
could be real. I wanted people to be able to have th- that awe, that wonder, there, that, oh, that's pretty neat. That makes sense, that kind of thing.
yeah,
And this could happen.
yeah, yeah. Oh, that's super cool.
Yeah.
Well, this is what I came up with this summer, and I really like asking people this. If you could go on an adventure with one of your characters, who would it be and why?
Oh, that's a tough question. And when I was thinking about that question, I thought there's one character in there. He's more of an antagonist than a protagonist, but his name is Thaddeus Wilt, and he's a human magic hunter. So he
Oh, that's
knows
cool.
the existence. He's part of this society called the Black Swan that knows the existence of the enchanted and these magical items. So he and his team go all over the world trying to hunt down magical items and magical creatures and find a way to get behind the veil. And he became one of my favorite characters to write. I was surprised, and it was funny because my editor, when he read the third draft or there was the second draft, he said, I got some good news and bad news for you. He said, Thaddeus Wilt is by far the best character. It's one of the best characters I've ever read.
Oh,
Uh, he's just awesome. And the bad news is Thaddeus Wilt is by far the best character in your book. And he's like, the problem with that is your main character is supposed to be the best character in your book.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we have a little bit of work to do. So he said, we need to add a little bit more to make Jeremy more of the memorable character.
Yeah,
And that was hard because I don't know. I just I enjoyed writing this guy. He's got this personality that is just he is he's a deep thinker, but he doesn't let anything bother him. And he's kind of like that chess player archetype that, where he's
mm,
always a step ahead of you, or he's always thinking ahead. And he's just so suave and debonair, and he has all these different characters. So if I went on, or qualities, so if I was going to go on an adventure, I'd want to be with him, um just because he'd be fun to talk to. He would
yeah,
be
yeah, yeah.
fun, and I wouldn't feel too worried about um any danger, because he's got a whole team of mercenaries that he has with him.
Oh, that's cool. Just picture like Sean Bean from National Treasure.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah. I
anybody have Sean's number for Steven? Call him up real quick. Be like, you want to play Thaddeus? That'd be
Well, what was interesting is when I did the audiobook for this, and I hired Sean Pratt to do the audiobook,
oh, nice.
he just blew me. I mean, he did the whole book was amazing. But when he took on the role of Thaddeus Wilt, he was incredible. And it was funny. It was awesome that throughout the process of him recording, he would send me these texts and about how excited he was, and about, little funny little quips here and there. And he told me that he really was enjoying becoming Thaddeus Wilt in the process. So then when I heard when he sent me back the finished copies, and I was listening to the proof copies, I was listening to him as Thaddeus Wilt, and I texted him back. I said, dude, if Netflix calls, I'm gonna tell them to cast you as Thaddeus Wilt.
That's awesome. It's always great when you can find somebody like that. I have one book. I'm not going to say whose it was, but like the person was not the right narrator.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I love the book. It threw me on. I can't listen to the audiobook. I've had
Uh,
other people where I enjoyed the book, but then the audiobook, the narrator did such a good job, it enhanced,
yes,
the
I
reading, and I think
and that
it's
was another thing I
perfect.
agonized trying to find the perfect voice for the Val Saga. My initial reaction, I don't know if you've heard of Michael Kramer.
Yeah, 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 yep.
Yeah, he was somebody I thought, oh man, I would love to for him to be the narrator, but he was he had too deep of a voice, and I
Mhm.
didn't want the main character Jeremy to have this. I'm sure he could have done a great job with it because Michael Kramer can do 1,000 voices, but I just wanted the tone of the book to have this this quality of this sense of a your
Yeah,
average sort of guy who's caught up in in this world that he can't even believe is going on and everything. And he's a teacher, of course, write what you know, right?
yeah, yeah,
So the
yeah.
character, so I wanted him to have that teacher voice, sort of and I started doing some research, listening to other authors. I came across Nick Podell and I thought he would be really good. And then I heard Sean Pratt and I was like, that's Jeremy's voice right there. And
That's awesome.
yeah, it
That's
was
super cool.
cool.
Well, if you had to fight one of your characters, which one would you dread the most and why?
Well, I have one of the other I wouldn't say he's the main character, but he's one of it's an ensemble. It's epic fantasy. You have all these different characters, but the main elf in the book, his name is Mercurio, and he's a sword sworn guardian
Oh, that's
of
awesome.
the elven uh of the elven nation, and he is, I mean, he's over 1,000 years old, so he's perfected his sword play very well. So I would not want to get into a fight with him. And there's some scenes in which in the book where Jeremy is watching this elf fight, and he's just in awe of just the
That's
grace in which he fights and the
great.
efficiency and every. So yeah, he would not be somebody I would want to go up against. That's for sure.
That's awesome. Love that title. That's really
Yeah.
cool. Well, for that last one, do you have any news, updates, promos, current projects, anything like that you can share with us before we head out?
Well, I am working on book 2, and I'm hoping to have that out within the next year. But I have this other project that's really cool, and it's near and dear to my heart, and I think you'd appreciate it as a teacher too. I have this thing called the Shared World Project,
Oh,
and what I'm looking for is I want to inspire young writers. I want to
okay.
find young writers to come beside and inspire them to write and help them through their writing slump, because a lot of times, again, we have that inner voice that says you're not good enough to do it,
Yeah, yeah.
don't waste your time. And I'm hoping to inspire young writers, and the challenge that I've given them is that the world of the Val Saga is our very own. It's so big, there's so many different stories, so I am looking for them to come with me and come up with these ideas, these stories. It could be fairy tale retellings that fit into, like what would the true story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs be like if
That's cool.
if it existed in the world of the Val Saga, or anything that they're interested in, and help them craft this story, and show them that they really can. You can write. If you got a story on your heart, write it, that
Yeah, yeah.
type thing. So that's called the Shared World Project. You can find more of that on my website, thevalsaga.com. And there's an application in there if you want to be a part of that. And
Oh, that's
it's
cool.
an open application. If we get a bunch, uh, we might do two books with it. So
Oh, that's cool.
the idea would be to produce a bunch of anthology series based on the writings of these young writers. And when I say young writers, I don't just mean, teenagers. I mean anybody who wants to write but doesn't feel that they can, or that they have the skill to do so, but they just want to write. Um, of course, I do like working with teenagers and young people as well, because I am an educator myself. But it's open to anybody who wants to be a part of that, and we'll just keep putting out anthologies as long as people are willing to write them. And uh, that's just one of the projects that I'm really excited about.
That sounds awesome. Well, if you want to, like I said before, send me the link and we'll put it right in the description. I just
Awesome.
want to remind, our audience, you can find Steven's books and socials, everything right there in the description, anywhere where you are listening or watching this podcast. You can also go to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast website. You can find that anywhere you search, or it's actually in this description too. And you can actually find all of our information on all of our authors, such as Stephen there. Thank you so much, Stephen, for coming on. It was a real pleasure. You gave me a lot to think about before my writing session today, one of two. So I'm glad that I got to talk to you beforehand. If there's anything we can do between now and when this podcast comes out, just let me know. Hit me up on social media, email me, and we'll help you out as best as we can.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no
It's
problem.
been a pleasure to be here. I
Yeah, yeah. Anytime you
enjoyed
want
our
to come back, just let me
conversation.
know. And yeah,
Thank
we'll
you.
back on. So yeah, I really appreciate your time today, and hope you guys have a good rest of the Saturday and enjoy the rest of the day, my friend.
You too.
See you later.